Okay, we are live now.
Fellow yogis and all brother and sister who are watching on our Facebook Live from Malaysia, Singapore, and Australia. Good evening and a warm welcome to our Dharma talk tonight by Patrick Carney entitled To Vacchagotta About Fire, Part 1. Patrick will deliver this talk in two parts. Today is Part 1 and Part 2 tomorrow. Again, Patrick will start off with chanting, followed by Dharma talk. I will now pass it to Patrick to start the session. Patrick, please.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, let's start the chanting. Vandana Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Tisadana Buddhang Saranang Gacchami Dhammang Saranang Gacchami Sanghang Saranang Gacchami Dutiyampi Buddhang Saranang Gacchami Dutiyampi Dhammang Saranang Gacchami Dutiyampi Sanghang Saranang Gacchami Tatiyampi Buddhang Saranang Gacchami Tatiyampi Dhammang Saranang Gacchami Tatiyampi Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. Panchasila Panatipata Viramani Sikaparang Samadhiyami Adinadana Viramani Sikaparang Samadhiyami Kamesu Michachara Viramani Sikaparang Samadhiyami Musavada Viramani Sikaparang Samadhiyami Sura Meraya Maja Pamatatana Viramani Sikaparang Samadhiyami. So this evening and tomorrow evening, we're going to talk about Nibbana, which we talked about briefly earlier, but we're going to go into more detail, which is a bit of a worry because it's a very difficult subject. But we'll do it by going through a single discourse that the Buddha, where the Buddha gives the teaching about Nibbana. And it's a dialogue that builds up to its climax. And so following this dialogue might help us to understand what the Buddha's getting at when he talks about Nibbana. And the discourse we're looking at tonight and tomorrow night is Aggi Vacchagotta Sutta, to Vacchagotta about fire. And if you want to find it, it's in Majjhima number 72. So let's first introduce our central character. This is Vacchagotta. Vacchagotta actually is not his personal name, it's his clan name. So Gotta in Pali or Gotra in Sanskrit means clan. So he's someone who belongs to the Vaccha clan. And Vaccha would have been the kind of historical, possibly mythical founder of that particular clan. So you could even translate Vacchagotta as descended from Vaccha. But the Buddha, so it's not actually his personal name. We don't know his personal name, but the Buddha just calls him Vaccha. So we will call him that too. So Vaccha comes from a wealthy Brahmin family, but he's brought up to believe in and practice the Vedic teachings. Now, at this time in India, the Vedic teachings belong mostly to the Northwest. So that it's headquartered, the Vedic tradition is headquartered in what is now Pakistan. But over the centuries, it's gradually heading down the Ganges Valley into the area that the Buddha lived in and traveled in. And this is an area where there's all sorts of different traditions. One of them is the Vedic, but there are others as well. Vaccha becomes dissatisfied with the Vedic teachings, and he has left home to become a wanderer, a paribhajika, someone who, a wanderer is a mendicant, like the Buddhist monks and nuns, and he wanders around living off alms, searching for the truth. So he's part of this broader movement of wanderers. And of course, the Buddha's students, the monks and the nuns, they're part of this tradition as well. And Vaccha has a very deep intellectual, existential curiosity. And he's not satisfied with the conventional answers that he's taught to the profound philosophical questions of his day. So he's got this very keen sense of inquiry. And over a number of time, a period of time, he had a number of dialogues with the Buddha, who clearly took an interest in him. And in Majjhima Nikaya, there's 3 discourses, one after the other, boom, 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 involving the Buddha talking to Vaccha. And to Vacchagotta about fire, Aggi Vacchagotta Sutta, is the second of these 3. So the discourse begins. The Buddha is staying at his monastery of Jeta's Grove outside the city of Savatthi. And Savatthi is the capital city of Kosala, which is kind of in the northeast of where the Buddha would wander. Jeta's Grove was his headquarters for about 20 years or more. And Savatthi, the city, is located close to what is now the border of Nepal, in what is now the eastern part of Uttar Pradesh. So Vaccha comes to visit the Buddha, and Vaccha comes to see the Buddha because he's got some urgent questions. And there are 10 of these questions that he wants to fire away at the Buddha. And these are questions about the universe, the relationship between the soul and the body, and about the survival of an awakened one after death. So these are 10 questions that people are debating in his time. All of them are difficult, which tells you something about Vaccha, that's what he's interested in. So let's start with the first 4 questions. These are about the world. Actually, the term that Vaccha uses is loka, which can be translated world, but don't mistake it for planet Earth. Like, this is a pre-modern period. This loka, from the Buddhist perspective, is the experienced universe. So you could actually translate loka as the universe. It's certainly bigger than planet Earth. And in each question, Vaccha wants to know the Buddha's view on what are big questions about the nature of the universe. And the questions are, is the universe eternal? Is the universe not eternal? Is the universe finite? Is the universe infinite? So these are the first four questions. And in each case, the Buddha says, I do not hold this view. So the Vaccha is undeterred, and he asks his next four questions. And these are about, in English, it's translated as the relationship between the soul and the body. But the words that Vaccha uses are jiva and sarira. And these are not quite soul and body in our way of looking at things. Jiva is literally life. And it comes from a root, jiv, meaning to live, to breathe. So jiva could be translated as life force. Would be one way of translating it. And it's basically, jiva is what gives life to a material body. And then you have sarira, and this is body, but specifically it's a material body without life. So for example, a corpse is sarira. Bones are sarira. A physical relic is sarira. So these questions are actually about the relationship between physical bodies and what gives life to physical bodies. In our terms, we might say the miracle of life. How is it that some material bodies are alive? Like, what is that all about? And it's translated conventionally as soul and body. So the questions are the soul and the body the same? Are the soul and the body different? So these are the two questions. And in both cases, the Buddha gives the same answer, I do not hold this view. Now, Vaccha does not give up. He keeps going. He's got four more questions. And these questions are about the fate of an awakened one after death. Now, these questions are really about the nature of awakening itself. So according to the Buddha's teaching, when we awaken, when we are enlightened, we abandon the three akusala mula, the three unwholesome roots. And these are the unwholesome roots of attraction, aversion, delusion. So these are the three fundamental movements of the human heart. So attraction is the movement toward an experience to grab hold of it. Aversion is the movement away from the experience, to resist it, to reject it, to get away from it. And that's a simple binary. And delusion is more complex. It's both not knowing what the experience is, ignorance, or if the mind knows what the experience is, it doesn't know what to do about it. Should I grab this? Should I reject it? Grab it, reject it. So these are the three unwholesome roots. And these three unwholesome roots condition pretty much all of human experience, like pretty much all of it. So the question is, if they cease, if they drop away, what's left? So clearly, like if you're awakened, enlightened, so they fall away. Now, clearly, what's left is the awakened one wandering around doing her thing. But what happens after she dies? What's left then? In other words, when we strip away all the surface appearances of the physical world and all of the normal psychological movements and obsessions of the human mind, what's left underneath? This is essentially the question. And you notice that this question is getting seriously close to asking, what is Nibbana? But it's not quite asking it. And the way that the Vaccha puts these questions is he asks, does an awakened one exist after death? Does an awakened one not exist after death? Does an awakened one both exist and not exist after death? Or does an awakened one neither exist nor not exist after death? Now, these represent the four logical possibilities. Like everything has to fit into one of these categories. So it's like a way of covering every possibility. So logically, the answer to the question has to lie in one of these four possibilities. And the Buddha replies to each question, I do not hold this view. Now, at this point, Vaccha is getting pretty frustrated. He bowls up these questions, and each time the Buddha goes, doop, and bats it away and does not engage. He just says, I do not hold this view. Now, Vaccha's getting frustrated because he wants to know what is going on. He has this strong intellectual, existential curiosity, this drive to understand. And he's not getting any satisfaction from the Buddha. He has enough faith in the Buddha to know that if anybody can answer these questions, it's the Buddha. But the Buddha stubbornly refuses to answer, which is really frustrating. And at last, at this point, light begins to dawn. And Vaccha realizes what the Buddha, to some extent, what the Buddha is doing. The Buddha is not rejecting any of these different beliefs or opinions or whatever, and he's not accepting any of them. He's rejecting the very idea of view. I do not hold this view. So here we come to a very important distinction, which is at the heart of this teaching, and that we've actually been talking about and playing with through this retreat. So the question is, what is view? Now, in Pali, the word is ditti. And view is very important for the Buddha. So if you think about the Eightfold Path, which is this basic template for the training, the first factor is samma ditti, right view. So it's, for the Buddha, very important. But what this conversation is drawing attention to, that the Pali word ditti and the English word view, and they're a very close match in terms of translation, they both have two levels of meaning. So let me give an example. Let's say I'm at home doing my online retreat, and I decide it's time to get out of the house. So I step outside, looking for some fresh air, and looking up, I can see a bright blue sky with dark clouds roiling towards me. And suddenly there's the sound of thunder and rain starts pouring down. And I can see people scatter for shelter as the traffic slows down and the streets fill with water. Have you got that picture in your mind? What I'm in all of this, what I am describing is a view. Now I'm standing there watching this, and this rain reminds me of all the strange things that have been happening to the weather patterns in recent years. And I've read about growing concerns about climate change and potential catastrophe that we're facing. And then I start to think about what is the best strategy to limit average global warming. Should we go nuclear, like some people think? Or should we just go completely for renewables? With all of this, what I am describing is a view. Do you see the difference between the two aspects of view? Both of them are view, but they're very, very different. The first one is about actual immediate experience. It's experiential. I can see the sky, I can see the clouds, I can see, hear, and feel the rain. The second moves away from the immediate actual experience to create a complex story based on abstract thinking. It's essentially conceptual in its nature. So they can both be called view, but they're actually very different. And the Buddha and Vaccha is beginning to realize that the Buddha is concerned with the nature of view itself. And he begins to realize, oh, this must be what he's getting at. So he asks the Buddha, is that clear, by the way, these two ways of looking at view? Because this distinction is very important. Both of them could be described as view, but they're very different. Okay. So Vaccha is beginning to get it. So he asks the Buddha a new question, which he obviously had not prepared before he came. So the conversation is beginning to wake up. It's beginning to become alive. And he asks the Buddha, what disadvantage does Master Gautama see that he does not take up any of these convictions? Now, you can see not only is the question different, but the language Vaccha is using is starting to change. He's not saying view in Pali ditti, he's saying Vacchagotta. So originally the Buddha was saying, I do not hold this ditti. And now Vaccha is asking not about the Buddha's ditti, but his Vacchagotta. So there's a shift in the language, and Vacchagotta is literally gone to view or immersed in view. And here it's translated as conviction, to have a conviction about something. And this implies both view in the abstract conceptual sense that we just talked about, and it suggests a clinging to this view, a holding on to it. So this Vacchagotta is a key term in our discourse. Bhikkhu Bodhi translates it as speculative view. So he's bringing out the abstract nature of it. It's very much something up here in the head. Bhikkhu Sujato translates it as conviction, and I'm following him. And this brings out the suggestion of clinging, holding to it. Bhikkhu Thanissaro translates it as position. So to take a position. My position on climate change is this. And again, it's indicating clinging in the sense that we take a stand on our convictions and we're ready to defend them. So what we're seeing is that the discussion is moving from what is happening in the world. For example, is the universe finite or infinite? To how we respond to what we believe is happening in the world. For example, am I clinging to my view about the universe? Do you see the shift that's happening? And this movement is really important for the Buddha because he is much more interested in how we live than in what we believe. That's really central to him. For him, beliefs are secondary. What's important is the way that we live. So, it's not, let me rephrase that. Our beliefs are important for the Buddha, but they're important for him because they condition the way that we live. But for the Buddha, what is central is the way that we live, not the beliefs. So beliefs are important because if we believe certain things, we will live in a certain way. But what he's interested in is the way that we live. So he's interested not so much in whether the belief is true or false, but what effect it has on the way that we live. So the discussion is moving from what is happening in the world to how we respond to what is happening, what we believe is happening. And so Vaccha is asking, what is the disadvantage of holding any of these convictions or positions, regardless of whether they're true or not? So here he's not asking, is it true, is it not true? He's asking, what is the disadvantage of holding to any of these beliefs? And the Buddha replies, Vacca, the conviction that the universe is eternal is a jungle of views, a wilderness of views, a twisting of views, a writhing of views, a fetter of views. It is characterized by suffering, by distress, despair, and fever, and it does not lead to disenchantment, the fading of obsession, cessation, peace, direct understanding, awakening, nibbana, and so on for the other 9 views. So he goes through all of those 10 views and gives the same answer. Now, you notice what the Buddha is talking about. He's not looking at whether or not these views are true. He doesn't seem to be particularly interested. He's looking at the effect that clinging to them has on us and the way that we live. He's interested in the effect that clinging to any view has on the way that we live. So if I hold to this view, whatever it is, does this move me towards awakening? Or does it move me away from awakening? In other words, when the Buddha talks about views, what he's really interested in is clinging. Is that making sense? This does get pretty dense. You're all just stunned into silence. Very good. Let's move on. And so, Vacca, you may be getting confused at this point. Believe me, Vacca is really getting confused at this point. And because he's not really following this. He doesn't quite get it. Because he's still preoccupied by whether or not these views are correct. He's still thinking in terms of truth or falsehood. He's not thinking in terms of clinging and liberation. He's starting to wonder whether the Buddha believes anything at all. And so he asks, then does Master Gautama hold any conviction at all? Like, do you believe in anything? And the Buddha replies, an awakened one has done away with convictions because he has seen this. Such is body, such its arising, such its disappearance. Such is feeling, its arising, its disappearance. Such is perception, its arising, its disappearance. Such are choices, their arising, their disappearance. Such is awareness, its arising, its disappearance. So you notice the discussion is moving again, this time to the nature of experience itself. So again, the Buddha is making this clear distinction between 2 ways of looking at view. Conceptual view. This is an abstract view or conviction. It's like an ideology that explains the world and its workings to me. Let's look at a very mundane level. For example, I might have the conviction, the view, my mind is far too distracted for me to be able to successfully meditate. That's a view, that's a conviction. And now notice that the conceptual view is bound up with clinging and a sense of identity. I can't meditate successfully. Why? Because this is the nature of me and my mind. It's always been like this. It will always be like this. So that's conceptual view. Experiential view is the direct, immediate seeing of something. So this might be, I'm practicing meditation, I'm with my meditation object, suddenly I'm swept away by thinking, and then later I realize I'm thinking. And then I'm faced with the choice. Do I continue with the thinking or do I go back to the meditation? Now you notice that this is quite different from the first one. This one is not bound up with clinging and identity. So there's this awareness now of the meditation object. It's not me. It does not belong to me. It's just this meditation object now. And then there's this movement into distraction. And this movement is not me. It doesn't belong to me. And then there's this choice to continue with the thinking or return to the meditation object. It's not me. It doesn't belong to me. So it's just this event, this event, this event, this event. This is experiential view, direct experiential view. Now, when the Buddha is talking about this, the example that he gives is the arising and disappearance of body, feeling, perception, choices, and awareness. And of course, those of you well educated in the Buddha's teaching will know he's talking about the 5 khandhas, the 5 aggregates, the 5 bundles. And this is all about identity. It's about self. And what he's saying is that an experiential view of an experienced event is unstable, changing, dynamic. But a conceptual view is stable, especially when it takes the form of an ideology or a conviction. A conceptual view, if it changes, it does so slowly and often imperceptibly. The experiential view of events is changing all the time. Bang, 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 bang. The conceptual view is stable and it changes very slowly. And this is the nature of concepts. So the world changes around us, but our convictions tend to remain the same. In contrast, experiential view changes and flows with the immediacy of experience itself. So, for example, we gave the example of climate change. So you have people who are raised and absorbing the conviction that climate stays the same. It's just absorbed into them as a fundamental conviction. And all of their life's plans and so on are all built on this. And then some troublemaker comes up and says, this weird weather we've been having lately, the climate is changing. And we have to do something about it. What on earth are you talking about? How can you challenge this conviction? For what? For starters, if you challenge this conviction, you are challenging the very world that I've always lived in. You're challenging my way of life. You're challenging me. And no, this is not acceptable. So, boom, hold on to it. Oh, well, the people who believe in this climate change business, they're all hippies. And they're all engaged in this conspiracy. And I think the Russians are paying them. So, conceptual view is stable. It's fixed. And we identify with them and with the world that they produce. Experiential view is changing. The closer we get to something, the closer we really look at something in the present, it's changing, shifting, adapting. So these 2 aspects of view are very different, yet they're both view. So on the basis of this, let's look at Vaccha's questions. You notice that they all revolve around identity. The identity of the universe, the identity of the soul and the body, the identity of the awakened one. They all revolve around identity, and all of them point to Vaccha's identity. Why is Vaccha so caught up in these questions? Why is it so important to him that the Buddha give him a satisfactory answer? It's because he is personally invested in them. So let's go back and look at Vaccha himself. Remember, he's a wanderer. He's someone who has walked away from a secure, high status life in order to resolve the existential questions that are eating him up from the inside. Does he remind you of anybody else? Isn't this how the Buddha started his career? And maybe this is why the Buddha is interested in Vaccha. Maybe he's looking at his former self. Maybe he's thinking, I know exactly what you're going through. So Vaccha has got a lot invested in finding the answers to these questions. If he can find these answers, then he justifies that rash decision he made years ago when he walked out of his normal life. Everybody thought he was mad. In fact, it was worse than that. Remember, he's Brahmin. And he's gone over to the samanas, the wanderers. Now, these are, from the Brahmin point of view, these are low-life heretics, the scum of the earth. And the Brahmins had a very low opinion of these characters, including the Buddha himself and his followers. How can he justify that to himself and to the people back home? If he can resolve these questions, at last he can be at peace, and he can be recognized among his peers, among his fellow wanderers, as someone who has successfully resolved the fundamental questions of life. Look, there goes Vaccha, he's figured it out. If you need to know the answers to fundamental questions, Vaccha, he's your man. He's got it. Of course, if he doesn't figure it out, if they're just spinning around, then he's just the loser, isn't he? Who couldn't handle the real world of home life and career and so on, ran away from it, chasing some silly dream, and ended up some wandering beggar. So if he cannot resolve these questions, how can he justify, even to himself, the sacrifices that he's made in pursuing awakening? So this is why Vaccha is so caught up in this. This is why he's pushing it. And I think this is why the Buddha is engaging with him. Because what the Buddha is doing, he's keeping his focus all the way through. His focus is on this deeper longing in Vaccha's heart for awakening, for peace. The Buddha is not distracted by this intellectual philosophical stuff. He knows Vaccha's caught up in it. But he can see that what's driving him is this deeper concern. And this is why the Buddha refuses to engage in a philosophical discussion, which he knows will accomplish nothing. So he just won't engage. Instead, he keeps pointing to Vaccha's determination to cling to concepts in order to create a world of stable meaning, even if that brings him pain. But he's determined to do this. So he's keeping Vaccha's gaze fixed on what is actually happening here and now, not on the theories that he's learned to take refuge in. Is this making sense? I hope so. And this comes out in the language that the Buddha uses. So the Buddha, in English, he says, an awakened one has seen this, such is body, such is arising, such is disappearance. So this is the English. And in English, we don't get the emphasis, which is very clear in the Pali. So the Buddha is saying that an awakened one doesn't just see, but sees this. This right here, this sensation, this thought, this feeling. And the emphasis is reinforced by such is body, such its arising, such its disappearance. It's very specific. It's this arising, this thought beginning right now, this sensation now. So what the Buddha is telling Vaccha is to abandon the world he's created through his concepts, and which he takes as to be real. Vaccha lives in this world of ideology. Let go of that and learn to live in a world that's defined by the felt actualities of the experience, that's actually grounded in this experience right now as it changes into this experience right now, as it changes into this experience right now. So ground himself in what is happening right here, right now. So he's saying to Vaccha, he's saying to us, ground yourself in this present experience and learn to relate to the world of concepts from this place. So don't get lost in your concepts about what is happening, but learn to be intimate with what is actually happening. And if we do that, then the liberation of the heart becomes possible. And so the Buddha goes on to say, that's the way the awakened one is liberated, by not clinging with the weakening, fading, cessation, and letting go of all disturbances or constructing of identity and possession and the underlying potential for separation. So here he's talking, this is straight anatta, not self talk, which we don't have time to go into. We just accept that that's what it is. But this is what we are practicing in this retreat. We're learning to be mindful. We're learning to track our experience over time by noting, by being directly aware of each experienced event as it comes and goes. And as we do this, we're not getting lost in our concepts about the world. We're becoming intimate with the world itself as it reveals itself. In other words, we're learning to live firsthand, not third hand. It's like someone who is told a story about what their friend is doing, and rather than simply believe it, goes and checks for himself, like what is actually happening. Rather than believing gossip, go and check what's really going on. And so this is the practice of noting and noticing that we're working on. And as we do this, we start to let go of the obsessions that our conceptual world creates. So the stories flowing through the mind, that before we would invest all our sense of reality into those stories. Now we see they're just stories, but they're stories that I cling to, that I hold to, that I identify with. Instead, we're getting closer to the felt reality where we say, mind creates stories. These stories feed emotions. They create my sense of identity. This is an ongoing process. Once I see how this process works, I've got choices I can make. I don't have to go along with this. I can do something else. Now, this does not mean that we do not use concepts in order to develop a wider understanding of the world. What it means is that our concepts are grounded on our actual experience as it unfolds over time. Now, when we do this, when we learn to live in the felt actuality of experience, we are coming closer to Nibbana. We are moving closer and closer to it. And tomorrow we'll continue with this discourse and we'll look at how the Buddha talks about this, how he explains it to Vaccha. Okay, so that's it for tonight.
Thank you
Any
for the Dharma talk.
questions or comments? Thank you. I hope it wasn't too esoteric.
Fellow yogis and all brother and sister who join us tonight in Facebook Live. Tonight's Dharma talk has ended. Thank you for joining us. And don't forget to join us again tomorrow night for the part 2. Same time, 7:30 p.m. Malaysia time. I will now stop the live streaming. Thank you.